So, a little bit of backstory. After A Farewell to Arms came out, I spent a bunch of time observing what was added in the update, and writing a whole script about everything. However, that dragged on a while, and with my ongoing technical difficulties, it dragged on still. Now that a few months have passed since the update, people mainly know all the stuff that was added, so a video telling them what they already know would be pointless. And so all the work I had so far was put away in a little folder that I hoped might be useful eventually. However, somewhat recently, I've gotten a handful of comments requesting that I cover just the R&G department and the stuff inside. So here we are. All the stuff I wrote about the floor won't be going to waste after all. Let's get started. The R&G department is of course accessed via the Cell Creep. He's guaranteed to spawn in his own special room in the Hollow. You give him a master round and 2 other guns or items, and his grate will blow open, allowing the player to explore the depths below. And those depths below are a janitorial closet, containing a snarling Agunim / Cell Creep who vanishes shortly after, and the title card with the name of the area. Upon coming out of the closet, you find yourself in a corridor full of well-dressed bulletkin. There's electric lights, water coolers, etc., all the modern conveniences I discussed in my predictions for the update. This is the most high-tech, advanced location within the Gungeon that we know of, beating the oubliette with all its plumbing and the forge with all its blacksmithing luxuries. This secret floor doesn't follow the same rules on random layout as pretty much anywhere else in the Gungeon. This floor is standard, it never shifts, never bends, it's always shaped the same like the breach. This floor also has no chests unless they randomly drop on room clear, no shops, no other NPCs, etc. But that doesn't mean Dodge Roll was lazy here. The real way the floor shines, where the real effort went, was the enemies. No enemies from other floors are present here, and every enemy seen here is never seen again anywhere else. While the rooms aren't randomized, enemy distribution kinda is, seeing as what might once have been enemy X one run could instead be enemy Y the next. Some of the enemies here are reskins of existing enemies with minor changes, whereas most have completely new attack patterns. No enemies here have Aminomicon entries, sadly, but it also kinda makes sense why they didn't want to clog up the Aminomicon with all these enemies never seen again in the game. A lore nut like me would have loved that though, not gonna lie. Most of these enemies are easily classified into groups, namely Westerns, Pirates, and Robots/Mutants. These enemies seem to be nods to those chambers that Dodge Roll initially planned for the game but never implemented. This is the R&D department after all, so enemies left behind in development winding up here is really to be expected. The Westerns presumably hint to the Cut Wild West floor, and the Robots and Mutants may hint towards the handful of futuristic cut floors. As for the Pirates, I didn't initially clue onto this, but a member in my server who goes by Longfall made the connection that these enemies may hint towards the Monstro/Belly floor, seeing as Monstro in the story of Pinocchio was a giant fish who would eat ships and all their crew. Mariner and pirate-themed enemies appearing on that floor would make a lot of sense. Let's start off with the enemies that I don't see an obvious connection to a cut floor for. Skip to the time on screen if you really don't care for a rundown of all the floor's enemies and just want to get to some more meaty stuff related to the update. First up, we have the first enemies you probably see upon entering the floor. These 2 dapper folks are called the Office Bullet and the Office Bullette by their sprites. It seems as though the female uniform in the R&G department is a purplish magenta thing as opposed to the black suit and red tie worn by the males. Also, what's even the difference between a male and female bulletkin? Is it just arbitrary? Is it built in? Do they choose? It's something I'm actually quite curious about. Back on track, these Officekin are just reskins of bulletkin and behave identically. They carry the Magnum. Next, we have this bulletkin wearing what appears to be a dynamite suicide vest called the Brollet by the files. Brolet, I don't really know. The Brollet behaves identically to a bulletkin except for a couple key behaviors. Upon death, they explode similarly to an enemy with the explosive pyre effect, and if the player walks too close to them, they will panic and detonate themselves. Unlike most other explosive enemies, they make no attempt to run at the player. They also carry the Magnum. Third up to bat, the musket ball guy. It should be noted that sprite names tend to use the word guy when referring to enemies. For example, pinheads are referred to as grenade guys. Keep in mind that a lot of these names aren't probably what Dodge Roll would prefer to call the enemies, it's just the functional names for them. Anyways, these enemies charge up before launching themselves at the player in the form of a large projectile. It should be noted that these guys only do contact damage while flinging themselves around and can be walked into harmlessly otherwise. I kinda thought they were cannonballs at first, since they appear to use similar sprites to the cannon Balrog's projectiles, but they seem to just be musket balls instead. Guess musket balls did end up being anthropomorphized in the Gungeon after all. Knock at the door number 4, the Armored Bullet Kin. These chunky boys appear to be dressed in rusty old knightly armor. They plod towards the player, firing remarkably slow-moving bolts using the wrist bow, the weapon of choice of the Skullet. They have sprites for their armor breaking away, but I've never been able to make this happen, so I don't know whether this was cut or I just haven't been able to trigger it. Speaking of sprites, upon death, these guys release a little green wisp not present in other enemies. The sprites for this wisp call it the Armored Bullet Spirit. So that's their spirit escaping. I'm not sure why they chose to give that to this enemy, whether or not it's some sort of reference, but still. Next we have the Angry Necronomicon. This enemy appears to be a large booklet bound in skin. Its bullets all appear to be the number 6, referencing its unholy nature. They can fire spinning bullet rings, squares, triangles, making them almost identical to an apprentice Gungerer in some ways. They can also form the symbol of a circle with a vertical line running through its center before firing it out in all directions, which is an attack used by the normal booklet. And finally, they can fire 3 loose spreads of 4 bullets each in the direction of the player. It's possible that this Angry Necronomicon is in reference to the unused Dreadbook enemy, which was supposedly the Ammonomicon of a Gungeoneer which was inked in gun grease and bound in gun-dead flesh. I've talked about it before, but we don't have much info on it. Following on from the last one, we have the Angry Tablet. I'd say that this tablet is supposed to be an archaic form of the modern booklet, containing much ancient knowledge. Its face can completely disappear into itself. These tablets can fire R's, N's, and the crossed through circle symbol, pretty much mimicking a booklet, aside from its spinning triangular bullet shape. You can also encounter candle guys on this floor. Now, candle guys aren't completely unused elsewhere in the game. You might recognize them as they're strewn liberally around bullet hell as decoration objects, but they also appear as part of the High Priest's unique modifier during challenge mode. The modifier is called Something Wicked, and it causes these candle guys to spawn throughout the fight. Unlike the versions we see in the R&G department, Something Wicked candle guys don't wander about and don't actively attack the player. Instead, they burst into large pools of fire when killed or even walked into. R&G department candle guys seem to have gotten their hands on magnums and used them to fire flaming bullets at the player. They don't burst into fire on death, and while they appear to be flying, they can still be hurt by creep. Functionally, they're just bulletkin, I'll be honest. I'm really bad at transitioning between these enemies, so let's just move on to one of the larger foes you can encounter here. This large bluish-green beaked bullet with the wings of a bat. Their sprites call them the Bullet Gargoyles, also known as Bullat Gargoyles. They fly around the room, firing a large amount of bullet projectiles in a diamond formation. As far as I can tell, they don't have any other attacks. These gargoyles seem to have sprites for emerging from a stony form into their fleshy and mobile selves, but I've not been able to witness them doing that, not on spawning as part of a second wave, etc. They do seem to revert to this stony form upon death before shattering, however. I'm sure a lot of you were very glad about this enemy. There was a bit of a joke going around before the update that the new boss ought to be just a lead maiden holding Casey, and while this wasn't the case in the end, fortunately, we did see a new lead maiden make its way to this floor, introducing the Fridge Maiden, found specifically in the break room. It opens, revealing the food inside, before it begins to fire cheese all around. Functionally, it's the same as the lead maiden, but it's still one of the most memorable things about the new floor. Second to last, we have these things that I at first thought were sideways dynamite kin. Dogs, maybe? But no, these guys are bipedal and apparently called M80 guys, or firecracker guys depending on where you look. M80s in reality are a type of powerful firework that was originally developed for military purposes, in order to simulate larger explosions or perhaps gunfire. That would explain these guys' fanciful explosions as opposed to the grittier explosions of their Nitra brothers. In fact, they behave a lot like Nitra, but they're not just a reskin, seeing as the range of their explosion line is around double that of your basic Nitra. Finally, for misc enemies, we have those big bullets that everyone thought was going to be the boss despite all the evidence to the contrary. In fact, these guys are just enemies like any other. They don't spawn at random, with 2 of them appearing on the floor each time. These bullets are known as Titan Bulletkin, and there are 3 different types of them. 2 of these Titans are identical to one another in behavior, while the third has a slight variation to his attacks. First up, there's the generic Titan bullet. He has no clothing, and he's the one with the attack variation. Unlike the other Titans, who fire bursts of 3 massive projectiles with each pull of their oversized triggers, the generic Titan fires bursts of 5 projectiles instead. Secondly, there's the Boss Titan bullet, named so because it's an authority figure in the department, not because it's the boss of the floor, wearing a red tie, and the Titaness bullet, a Titan version of the purple-clothed bullets found earlier on the floor, with large earrings despite having no ears, and a large amount of hair to complete its feminine appearance. I've heard a lot of people call this Titaness a Karen, and I can't help but think of that every time I look at her. Upon entering one of the rooms containing a Titan, there's a chance you'll see a bunch of Gungeoneer figurines on the desk. Now, this might just mean the R&G department is considering merchandising the Gungeoneers, but I can't help but think of that one scene from Spaceballs, and I hope beyond hope that it's a reference to it. Okay, that's all the normal enemies on the floor. Now let's get to the Westerns. Let's start off with this Bulletkin wearing a large brown top hat. He appears to have taken care to get that authentic Western poor dental hygiene. He's called the West Bullet by his sprites, but alas, he is but a Bulletkin reskin and behaves identically. He wields the SAA. Next, we have the Western Shotgunkin equivalent, again known just as West Shotgun. Its slug appears to be stylized as a large hat, and he has a frankly adorable mustache, despite the gun dead supposedly not being able to have facial hair. Please follow your own rules, dodge roll, it hurts me. These guys hold the Winchester and behave like blue Shotgunkin at first, firing spreads of 5 bullets followed closely by a spread of 4. Upon death, they explode into a bunch of bullets that fly out in irregular directions like the veteran Shotgunkin. During this final attack, they also fire 2 large cannonballs in the direction of the player. These guys are one of my favorites. Moving on from bullets, we have this red snake creature known simply as the Snake. Not related in any way to the Anaconda, I'm pretty sure. They act identically to veteran Shotgunkin minus the bullet burst upon death. They shoot out a pointed and tight spread of bullets, anticipating the player's movements to catch them off guard. They kinda remind me of Cobrats or Triclides from Super Mario Bros. 2, but that's probably because it's just a red snake. Finally, we have the Cactus, creatively called the Cactus. They have the general shape of a Shotgunkin, but don't behave like one. Instead, they move towards the player, occasionally pausing to shoot spines around them in an even circle. There's not much to say here, other than that this enemy is one of the things that made me realize that there was reference to the Western floor. Moving on to pirates, we have a simple pirate bullet wearing eye patches over both of their eyes and a nice little pirate hat. Like the Western Bulletkin, they're just a Bulletkin reskin, but their bullets do look a bit more spherical, like musket balls. This does make sense, since they appear to be wielding the dueling pistol, a musket weapon. Though, unlike the actual dueling pistol, its bullets don't bounce. Next, we have a pirate Shotgunkin with a large wig coming all the way down its slug, a little tricorn hat, and a black coat with a white undershirt and gold epaulettes. Very elegant. They behave identically to the red Shotgunkin, aside from their musket ball-looking projectiles that they fire using Old Goldie of all things. Finally, for the belly-born scoundrels, we have the parrot. It's just a reskinned Gigi. I'm not sure what I expected. Gigi. Is it pronounced Gigi or Gigi? I never actually learned that. I've just called them Gigi my whole life, and I had a sudden realization while recording that it might be Gigi. Well, you'll let me know. It's almost over. I just have to run through all the futuristic robot enemies and the mutants. Robots first. We have the Bullet Mech, a large robotic vehicle mimicking the form of the simple Bulletkin and being driven by a Bulletkin in its globe-like slug. These enemies attack by sending out 2 waves of bullets around themselves. The first wave always contains significantly more bullets and is diamond-shaped, whereas the second wave is a more miserly serving of lead in a circular formation. Next are these enemies named Cylinders. They might be a reference to gun cylinders, or they might just be uncreatively named based on their shape. Regular cylinders float towards the player, firing 3 spreads of 4 triangular bullets with a pause in between each spread. The amount of spread seems to be random, and it can be really tight or full of wide gaps. Red cylinders move like the normal cylinders but have different attacks. They fire 2 spreads of atomic bullets, always totaling to 6 bullets. Usually there's 3 bullets in the first spread and 3 in the second, but seemingly at random the cylinder will fire 2 bullets in the first spread and 4 in the second. Mutant time now. This floppy, decrepit-looking bullet is referred to rather casually by its sprites as the Caliber Thing Bullet Man, or more simply, the K-Bullet. Clearly this relates to Caliber lore-wise, but I'm not sure what the ramifications might be. It's possible that the holes that cover them may relate to the glowing eyes that cover the confirmed, the terrible affliction that they seek to hide with their robes. Perhaps these are confirmed who have shed their robes. I don't know. Upon death, K-bullets turn grey, reminding me a lot of the caliber synergies with the Abyssal Tentacle or the Dragonfire. Functionally, they act as reskins of the Tombstoner, firing cross formations. Next, we have the weird, slightly creepy, slightly goofy Calibullet. Yeah, another enemy related to Caliber. Don't confuse the Calibullet with the K-bullet, that'd be unforgivable. Calibullets have a round, pulsating slug and two long tentacle legs with which they trudge along their mortal path. They fire loose spreads of 5 bullets every time, of which 2 bullets are always slightly further ahead, a bit like the red cylinder. They're not super noticeable, there's not even very much I can say. I can't relate it to anything else in the game that I can think of. And finally, the enemy you've all been waiting for. Fish. Fish bullets, to be more precise. These guys are just straight reskins of Bulletkin, but I love them so. I'd say that they're the result of experiments on the fish found within the Gungeon. We see them here and there, most notably being fired by the barrel, though we never see a green Gungeon fish that would explain the green variant. The green fish bullets are just referred to as fish bullet by their sprites. The blue fish bullets, weirdly enough, are called red fish bullets by their sprites. Red fish is blue fish? 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish is blue fish? I guess that's what they were going for? Okay, we're officially done with enemies. I really hope I didn't bore any of you. I just felt as though I ought to document what I could about these strange enemies, but it's okay. It's over now. They can't hurt you anymore. They can't hurt you anymore. Not anymore. They can't hurt you. Anyways, we've got more to discuss on the meat of the R&G department and the boss first and foremost. It's Agunim, as you've probably learned by now. Boss of the Bullets Past, wizard underling of the powerful Cannon who attempted to invade the Gungeon in ages long past. In the physical Ammonomicon, it was confirmed that Agunim and the Cell Creep were one and the same, and in this update they finally tied that into the main story of the game. Agunim brings you down to this floor you were never meant to access to finally finish you off and kill his own past. Probably so he can attempt to invade the Gungeon once more. He does this with an attack helicopter. Because of course he does. The fight itself is tricky but fairly standard for a secret boss apart from one thing. Remember in my prediction video when I threw out a random little theory about dodge roll's hint about volume? Imagine if it spoke, wouldn't that be weird? Well, call me an oracle because actually, yes, he does. Agunim, voiced by Cam Clark. Most of Agunim's dialogue is fairly standard and not hugely important, though there are some lines that stand out. Let's just move on from that. While traversing the R&G department, you might notice that this new tile set adds windows along the walls of some rooms, looking out over a city. An actual, proper city. Skyscrapers and all. I managed to find the sprite that's used for the city backdrop so you can see it a lot more clearly here. This might seem absolutely ridiculous and insane, and it kinda is, but it also makes a lot of sense. The Hollow and the Forge are polar opposites, a frozen series of catacombs and caves as opposed to the burning industrial nature of the Forge. The floors couldn't really be all too close to begin with, because molten metal and ice really don't get along too well. This floor could just be acting as a buffer between the two. This idea that there's a large cavern between the two chambers makes a lot of sense. Also, I know a lot of people seem to get the impression that upon going to the new floor, you go to a place outside the Gungeon or some weird pocket dimension or something, and I don't really think that's the case. Occam's razor and all, and there's one tiny detail that cements it for me. The fight with Agunim takes place on a rooftop of one of the skyscrapers in this cavern, and from above we can see snow. At first, this might confirm to you that this takes place outside the Gungeon, but to me it makes it all the clearer that this floor is where it appears to be. Underneath the Hollow. The chamber of ice and snow. Of course snow comes down from above. The implications of the Gungeon having a population sufficient enough to sustain an entire underground city are interesting, but I think there's more to it than that. This floor is clearly a bunch of references to stuff that was cut from the game, but I would theorize that this chamber is the canonical place where Bulletkin are designed and tested, and where things like Debts were probably prototyped before being sent out to the rest of the Gungeon. Bulletkin are built. and any good smith ought to plan their designs before putting it to the anvil. That's what I think this floor is to the universe of Gungeon, and it, in its own way, slightly adds legitimacy to the canon of the cut secret floors. Is this a perfect theory? Hell no. It falls apart if you look at enemies like snakes or parrots through this lens. How do you prototype an animal? But I don't think this floor was meant to be fully coherent. It was a nice send-off, a last hurrah. It definitely has lore implications, but it also wasn't meant to be studied too closely. So let's study it too closely. Outside of the city we see outside the window, there are a few other small details I'd like to draw to your attention. First of all, you probably notice while traversing this chamber, there's a room containing 6 red windows in the floor. If you linger, you'll see a variety of strange and twisted monsters push themselves up to the glass of the chambers in which they're held. These are presumably more of the experiments done in this chamber to design new enemies for other floors. There are 3 in total. The sprites call them alien floor cells, but I don't think the creatures within them are actually extraterrestrial. The word alien there is more like just a stand-in for freaky doodad. The first is a large, bloated blue caterpillar-looking thing. I managed to locate its sprites, but they don't give this creature a special name. The biggest thing I can note is that this giant insect shares a color scheme with the Gungeon ant, and may be a related species. The second is a twisted-looking bullet with many eyes and a plethora of spindly legs that it uses to pull itself up to the glass. This thing is simply called the Spider. I have no idea what this could be, or what this may have been. Finally, we have the most mysterious of the 3. This grey gun cylinder with fire spewing from its chambers and an eye in the very center. This thing has no visible limbs or other body, but who knows, it might be fully humanoid down there in the shadows for all we know. This thing is called, strangely, the Lever. Leever. I don't know if this is a reference to anything, if it's the creature's name or some other descriptor. Levers are things in the Legend of Zelda franchise, but comparing them side by side, I don't know how much they're actually related. As it stands, it's a bit of a mystery. Finally, the final room of the floor before the boss contains a series of specimen tubes, full of green goop containing a pulsating white and red thing that matches the color scheme of enemy bullets. These don't do anything, and they're destroyed like any other obstacle, but I'd like to take a closer look at that thing inside. I might be crazy. A lot of people I've brought this up to don't see it. But doesn't the thing in there look a lot like the interdimensional horror? I've done a handful of videos in the past about the interdimensional horror, and there are a lot of signs pointing to this thing originating in the Gungeon. And if the R&G department is where new enemies are prototyped and made, the test tube creation of the interdimensional horror infants occurring in this chamber makes a huge amount of sense. But anyways, that's all I have for you this time. This won't be the last video born of a Farewell to Arms, however. Consider this a sister video to another project I'm working on, going over all the cut content that the update brought with it, because it brought with it a fair bit. I myself am looking forward to making it. But for now I've got to go make a human sacrifice to the elder god of cheats and hacks, Garathompner. See ya!
Lord Helmet, what? You're needed on the bridge, sir. Knock on my door! Knock next time! Yes, sir. Did you see anything? No, sir. I didn't see you playing with your dolls again. Good!